American singer, songwriter, rapper, and actor Robert Beresford, better known by his stage name Bobby Brown, was born in Boston, Massachusetts on February 5, 1969, is referred to as the King of New Jack Swing. Brown's early years were characterized by poverty and exposure to crime while growing up in Roxbury's Orchard Park projects. But at the age of 3, he was singing in the choir at his church, finding comfort in music. Brown's early talent led to his success as a founding member of the R&B group New Edition and later as a solo artist. At the age of 9, he co-founded New Edition with pals from his childhood. The group's 1983 debut album, Candy Girl, which combined pop and R&B, was a success. Although Brown was a star due to his charisma, he left in 1985 due to conflicts over his showmanship. King of Stage 1986 and Don't Be Cruel 1988, which sold over 7 million copies, were the highlights of Brown's solo career. R&B, hip-hop, and pop are all combined in hits like My Prerogative, Every Little Step, and Ronnie to Find New Jack Swing. In 1990, his song Every Little Step earned him a Grammy for Best Male R&B Vocal Performance. Hits like Humping Around were featured on albums like Forever 1997 and Bobby 1992. For songs like Home, Again 1996, Brown rejoined New Edition. In addition to performing music, he participated in reality TV series like Being Bobby Brown, 2005, and movies like A Thin Line, Between Love and Hate, 1996. Brown is still performing, going on solo tours and New Edition residencies in Las Vegas from 2024 to 2025. He started a brand of seasonings and sauces called Bobby Brown Foods and is still involved in showbiz. First, a history of substance misuse and legal issues. Robert Beresford Brown was born in Boston, Massachusetts on February 5, 1969, and raised in the Orchard Park projects, which were characterized by a high rate of poverty, violence, and a lack of opportunities. His early exposure to drugs and alcohol as a result of these conditions paved the way for a lifetime struggle with addiction. Brown began dabbling with drugs in his early teens, a practice that was normal in his culture but would be especially harmful given his path to stardom. In his 2016 memoir, Every Little Step, Brown describes how he started using marijuana and alcohol to deal with the stresses of his life, such as surviving a near-fatal shooting at the age of 14 and dealing with the loss of friends. Aggression. Brown's access to affluence and the party lifestyle of the entertainment industry worsened his substance use when his music career took off with New Edition and then as a solo artist. What started out as recreational excess turned into a dependence on more potent substances, such as cocaine and then heroin. Brown's addiction was a reflection of the structural issues he encountered rather than just a personal shortcoming. Being thrown into stardom without sufficient assistance while growing up in a marginalized community, and surrounded by supporters who frequently placed his productivity ahead of his welfare. Almost all of Brown's important relationships suffered as a result of his addiction. Above all, his well-publicized union with Whitney Houston, due to their shared difficulties with substance misuse. The 1992-2007 married pair became tabloid staples. Cycles of drug usage, personal conflicts, and public scrutiny characterized their relationship, with Brown being portrayed as the catalyst for Houston's downfall. Although they both struggled with addiction, Brown's arrests and unpredictable actions received too much attention, overshadowing their vulnerabilities. A terrible divorce and long-lasting emotional wounds resulted from the marriage's decline due to addiction, which also produced their daughter, Bobby Christina. In addition to Houston, Brown's substance misuse strained relationships with friends, family, and co-workers. Tensions about his behavior, which some bandmates blamed on his rising drug usage, contributed to his resignation from New Edition in 1985. His addiction caused periods of instability and absence, which also had an impact on his relationships with his kids. In his own words and interviews, Brown expressed profound remorse for the time lost to addiction, especially with his kids, some of whom sadly followed in their father's footsteps and struggled with drugs. Brown's addiction showed up as a string of decades-long legal problems. Every event made his public troubles more pronounced. From petty violations to major accusations, his run-ins with the law started in the late 1980s and continued well into the 2000s. Every legal dispute created a media frenzy and solidified Brown's reputation as a troubled celebrity. As a result, his reputation was damaged, and peers in the profession and promoters began to doubt his dependability. His solo career, which was once a juggernaut with classics like My Prerogative, struggled to regain momentum when gigs dried up. Brown's career path was directly impacted by his addiction and legal issues. His commercial pinnacle occurred in the late 1980s and early 1990s, when his charisma and inventiveness were on full display in Don't Be Cruel, 1988, and Bobby, 1992. But by the middle of the 1990s, his productivity had become erratic, and albums like Forever, 1997 did poorly, which was indicative of his disinterest. Because they were worried about cancellations or unpredictable performances, promoters were hesitant to book him, and his formerly strong R&B presence diminished. His frequent and frequently court-mandated stays in treatment provided short-term respites, but they were rarely followed by long-term sobriety. His public image was further harmed when the 2005 reality show Being Bobby Brown revealed his chaotic lifestyle instead of serving as a vehicle for his return. Instead of being a career resurgence, the program, which portrayed the tumultuous dynamic between Brown and Houston, became a cultural footnote. Although Brown's path to sobriety hasn't been straight line or comprehensive, it does demonstrate his tenacity. By the 20,110s, after the terrible losses of Bobby Christina, 2015, Houston 2012, and his son Bobby Jr., in 2020 Brown started to address his addiction more seriously. He went back to treatment in 2012 and has subsequently talked about how therapy, family, and faith helped him get well. He found stability in his marriage to Alicia Etheridge in 2012, and their 3 children gave him a new sense of direction. The second is Whitney Houston's untimely death and how it affected Bobby Brown. Hours before she was supposed to attend a prenatal Grammy Awards ceremony, Whitney Houston was discovered unconscious in a bathtub at the Beverly Hilton Hotel in Beverly Hills, California, on February 11, 2012. Her death was eventually determined to be an unintentional drowning by the Los Angeles County Coroner's Office, with heart problems and cocaine usage cited as contributory factors. Although cocaine was the main issue, toxicology testing showed residues of several other narcotics in her blood, including marijuana, Xanax, and muscle relaxants. Fans who had watched Houston battle addiction and had hoped for her return, particularly following her recent role in the movie Sparkle, 2012, were shocked by her passing. The news was devastating for Bobby Brown. When he found out about Houston's death, he was in Mississippi performing with New Edition. Brown recounts the moment he received the news in his 2016 memoir, Every Little Step, noting how he battled with enormous anguish and found it difficult to continue performing. In addition to being deeply personal, the loss served as a sobering reminder of the addiction that had dominated their lives and dominated much of their time together. The 1992-2007 marriage between Brown and Houston was one of the most closely watched partnerships in entertainment history. At the time of their marriage, Brown was riding high as the king of New Jack Swing with hits like My Prerogative, while Houston was at the height of her career, having just released the hit soundtrack to The Bodyguard in 1992. Their partnership was initially hailed as a power couple who combined pop and R&B. It swiftly devolved into a tabloid drama characterized by anarchy and destruction. Their joint battle with substance misuse was at the heart of their marital problems. Although Brown and Houston had previously used drugs and alcohol, their marriage made these problems worse. According to his own admissions, Brown, who started using drugs in his teens, introduced Houston to cocaine. Even though he has made it clear that her addiction was already growing, Houston's dependence on cocaine and eventually crack became a major part of their existence as a result of the demands of celebrity and personal fears. Drug usage became commonplace in their home, especially when their daughter Bobby Christina, who was born in 1993, was around. Addiction drove the couple's unpredictable actions and public outbursts that damaged their reputations. As rumors of missed shows, unkempt appearances, and rehab stays began to circulate, Houston's once immaculate reputation as America's sweetheart began to disintegrate. Already seen as a bad boy, Brown was often held responsible for Houston's downfall. This storyline oversimplified their shared difficulties, but it remained in the public consciousness. Instead of humanizing them, their 2005 reality show Being Bobby Brown featured glimpses of Houston's erratic behavior and Brown's attempts to control their pandemonium, highlighting their dysfunction. Allegations of domestic abuse further strained the marriage and contributed to the public's view of Brown as a harmful influence in Houston's life. Brown was arrested for battery in 2003 when Houston called the police to claim that he had hit her. However, the charges were eventually dismissed. Houston's obvious wounds, such as a battered cheek, heightened public indignation and media attention. Brown has denied having a history of abuse, saying in interviews that their arguments were reciprocal and frequently made worse by drugs. In a 2009 interview with Oprah Winfrey, Houston also admitted that she had retaliated during fights, acknowledging her part in their tense relationship. Whether or not these accusations were proven true, they solidified Brown's reputation as a villain. He was frequently depicted by the media and fans as the mastermind behind Houston's demise, disregarding her agency and underlying issues. After her passing, this story would come back to haunt Brown, making it more difficult for him to grieve in solitude. The marriage was irreparable by 2006, citing irreconcilable differences. Houston filed for divorce, and the separation was finalized in 2007. Conflicts about Bobby Christina's custody and Brown's unstable finances made the divorce acrimonious. Due in part to his continuous addiction and legal issues, Houston was granted primary custody, and Brown's access to his daughter was restricted. Though it also sparked Houston's fleeting attempts at recovery, the divorce marked a low point for Brown, who faced homelessness and financial devastation. Despite the fact that they ultimately failed, Houston's passing brought Brown back into the public eye, not as a distraught ex-husband, but as a scapegoat for her terrible demise. Houston's demise was attributed by fans and media sources to their drug-fueled marriage and Brown's alleged influence. In the immediate aftermath, accusations were common on social media channels, including early messages on Twitter, now X, with hashtags like #blame Bobby trending. The 2003 domestic violence episode and Brown's arrests were re-examined by talk shows and tabloids, who blamed him for Houston's addiction and demise. For Brown, who was already in shock at the loss, this public demonization was very upsetting. While acknowledging their common addiction, he stressed that Houston's decisions were her own. In a 2012 interview on Today, he expressed annoyance at being held accountable, saying, "I'm not the reason she's gone. She had her own issues," a point that is frequently missed in the haste to pass judgment. Audiences jeered him during his performances, and he was questioned about his sobriety and suitability as Bobby Christina's parent in his private life. Houston's passing profoundly impacted Brown, influencing his public, professional, and emotional lives. He has compared the loss to an emotional wound that never completely heals. He spoke movingly about how Houston's voice and presence continued to be a part of him in a 2018 interview. He also devoted performances to her memory, especially during New Edition's 2024 residency in Las Vegas. Despite ongoing setbacks, he was somewhat driven to pursue sobriety, especially after 2012 out of respect for Houston and a desire to keep their kids safe. The tragic death of Bobby Christina Brown and its lasting effects on Bobby Brown come in at number 3. Bobby Christina Brown was found unconscious and face down in a bathtub at a Roswell, Georgia townhouse on January 31, 2015, by her friend and partner Nick Gordon. After receiving CPR from emergency personnel, she was taken to North Fulton Hospital and put into a medically induced coma to stabilize her condition. The scenario was very similar to Whitney Houston's death, which occurred on February 11, 2012, after she was discovered drowned in a hotel bathtub. Drug usage was determined to be a contributing factor in her accidental drowning death. The initial optimism for Bobby Christina's recovery was replaced by a sobering prognosis as medical professionals concluded that her oxygen deprivation had caused irreversible brain damage. Bobby Christina stayed in a coma for the next 6 months, first in hospitals and then in a hospice. The media paid close attention to her illness, with tabloids and paparazzi asking her family for updates. Brown and Houston's family remained at her bedside in vigil, battling the doubt that she would live. Bobby Christina passed away at Peachtree Christian Hospice in Duluth, Georgia, on July 26, 2015, with test reports showing the presence of marijuana alcohol, cocaine, and morphine in her system. The Fulton County Medical Examiner's Office eventually determined that she died from lobar pneumonia brought on by drug intoxication and water immersion. It was unclear if her condition was unintentional, deliberate, or the result of outside influences because the method of death was labeled as uncertain. Public conjecture and conspiracy suspicions were stoked by the similarities between Bobby Christina's and Houston's deaths. Some blame Bobby Christina's partner, Nick Gordon, for her disappearance, pointing to his involvement in her search and claims of physical violence. Gordon was accused of giving her a poisonous cocktail and putting her in the bathtub in a civil suit brought by her estate. However, no criminal charges were ever brought because of the lack of proof. For Brown, who had to deal with the loss of his daughter, as well as constant scrutiny on his family's history of addiction, the lack of closure only made the tragedy worse. For 18-year-old Bobby Christina, Houston's passing in 2012 marked a sea change. She became the only heir to the $20 million estate that Houston left behind. However, the inheritance resulted in emotional upheaval and legal disputes. Family relationships were strained as Houston's mother and sister-in-law Pat fought with Bobby Christina for ownership of the estate. There was controversy surrounding her relationship with Nick Gordon, whom Houston had reared as an unofficial adopted son. Following Houston's passing, they developed a love relationship that was criticized by the public and family for being unsuitable considering their quasi-sibling relationship. Bobby Christina's parents' battles with substance misuse were similar to her own. Her use of alcohol and drugs, including cocaine and marijuana, as a coping method for stress and bereavement was observed by friends and family. As social media posts on sites like Twitter and X exposed her emotional vulnerability, her public appearances became more unpredictable. The terrible events of January 2015 were the result of a perfect storm including loss, celebrity, and addiction. Bobby Christina's passing caused Bobby Brown to experience an unimaginable amount of heartache. He referred to it as unimaginable pain in a statement following her passing. This attitude was repeated in follow-up interviews and in his 2016 biography, Every Little Step. It felt like a harsh reenactment of history because Brown had previously experienced the deaths of Houston and Bobby Christina. In addition to the public's propensity to hold him accountable for his family's tragedy, the parallels between the two incidents, both involving bathtubs and drugs, exacerbated his pain. Despite his attempts to provide for his daughter, media outlets re-examined his own past of addiction and arrests, portraying him as a careless father. Bobby Christina and Brown had had a complicated connection. His addiction and legal issues, including as DUIs and drug possession charges, restricted his presence in her life during her early years. Their relationship was further affected by Houston's main custody following their 2007 divorce. Even though Brown was still a loving but erratic person, he made an effort to get back in touch with Bobby Christina after Houston passed away by asking her to family gatherings and urging her to get help for her drug addiction. But because of the barrier caused by her affiliation with Houston's family and her friendship with Gordon, Brown felt unable to defend her. For Brown, Bobby Christina's 6 months in a coma were excruciating. He fought media intrusion and prayed for a miracle at her bedside for many hours. In addition to newspapers publishing sensationalized claims, including fake reports of her recovery, paparazzi set up camp outside hospitals. Brown made a public appeal for privacy, saying, "My daughter needs her rest." The experience put his sobriety to the test, and he relied on his faith and wife, Alicia Eridge, to get through it. Brown was haunted by the heartbreaking decision he had to make after Bobby Christina passed away to take her off life support. Following Bobby Christina's passing, there were both emotional and legal difficulties. Although the case produced no conclusive answers, Brown backed the lawsuit against Gordon because he thought he was somewhat to blame. Given that the cause of death was unknown, Brown was left wondering what might have happened and whether he might have taken action sooner. He emotionally acknowledged, "I failed her in some ways, but I also emphasized my love for her." In a 2016 interview on 2020, remembering happy times like teaching her how to ride a bike. Brown's life was significantly impacted by Bobby Christina's passing, which strengthened his resolve to stay sober and prioritize his family. He had a new sense of purpose after being married to Etheridge in 2015 and starting their small family. In an attempt to honor Bobby Christina by leading a healthy lifestyle, Her passing motivated him to intensify his rehabilitation. He has discussed spiritual activities and therapy as methods for grieving management in interviews. Even so, he admits that the pain is still intense. Despite the tragedy, Brown is still recognized as a cultural figure who helped create modern R&B and influenced musicians like Usher and Chris Brown, especially in interviews and his 2016 memoir, Every Little Step. He has been candid about his loss and healing. Brown, who has been married to Alicia Keys since 2012 and has 3 kids with her, still performs and pays tribute to his departed loved ones through his